welcome everybody to our LinkedIn Live Book Club series, where we're talking about my book, Blooming Good Information Management, as the starting point for practical conversations about AI, governance, leadership, and information management. Each week, I've been live for several weeks now. We've been exploring different challenges facing organizations today and connecting with that trusted information. Now, one of the key things, and I'm super excited that we're talking today, is tackling a frustration many organizations are recognizing. Copilot gives us weak, confusing, or incomplete answers, and the technology gets blamed. But actually, is Copilot the problem, or is it exposing problems we already had? Now, stay with us because I've got Kunal Kankare joining me, because at the end of the hour, we'll be identifying what poor answers can be revealed, what leaders should fix first, and one practical check you can run this week. So let me know and let us know in the comments where you're joining from, what your role is, and whether you think that this is a Copilot problem or an information problem. Now, welcome, Kunal. Do you want to introduce everybody? Introduce yourself to everybody.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you for making me a part of this book club. And you've been doing some incredible work, Jackie, in this space. And that matters a lot. So, hello, everyone. I am Kunal Kankaria, joining from Chennai, India. I clean up information chaos for a living. Records management, be it retention, sensitivity labels, DSPM, e-discovery, information barriers, insider risk management, everything that you see in Purview, and the wider information governance work across SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, and I've been doing that with organizations, both large and small, right across the globe. And for most of the years, this was a conversation that was between record managers, compliance officers, data protection officers, and in some cases even lawyers. It rarely reached the board, and then Copilot turned up, started reading out everything loud, and suddenly the same people who never cared for governance are asking why AI is giving two departments two different answers. So which is what I am looking forward to today, and discuss about it, Jackie. Thank you.
Brilliant. And today I really want to make this practical and honest without assuming every disappointing Copilot answer is a technological fail. Because before we get into that detail, what are you hearing most often from organizations when they say, oh, Copilot is not giving us good answers, Kunal?
Well, Copilot for me is an incredibly convenient scapegoat. When someone asks a question and gets an incomplete answer or a wrong answer or maybe an outdated answer, the natural reaction is always Copilot does not work. But I think organizations need to ask a different question: what information did we give Copilot to work with, right? If your employee has access to, let's say, thousands of documents, and some are old, some are duplicate, some are conflicting, some belong to projects that ended years ago, and then we give them an AI assistant and ask them for a definitive answer, we are expecting AI to distinguish good information and bad information. Now, that's not really an AI problem, right? Is it? So that's an management problem. I mean, Copilot isn't necessarily giving us bad answers. Sometimes it is just giving us the best answer it can based on the bad information environment it has access to. So that's partly blaming Copilot is not going to work. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. And I talk about in my book, that information management strategy, talk about sailing the ship, being the captain of that ship. And that's one of the fundamental things that you should be, really getting involved with before, deploying AI, because it just shines, as the AI Copilot just shines a spotlight on that information chaos. So, Canal, when Copilot produces a poor result, what should leaders resist doing immediately, and what should they investigate instead? Can you give us an example of what that would look like?
Well, for information leaders, I would say that it is an opportunity. So instead of looking at Copilot as risk, it is an opportunity, because one thing that information professionals have always struggled with is executive attention. I think we've talked about it for a long time. We have attended so many conferences, and I think that's exactly one thing that we hear from information professionals, that how do we make a business case for this? Records management is not a priority, and all of that. I mean, historically, information governance could sound like housekeeping, retention, records, metadata, classification, permissions. I mean, we are talking about all the boring stuff. Now, what we can say with Copilot is that the quality of our information directly affects what our AI can do, and that can land information professionals in the boardroom get those 4 minutes with the CEO or the CIO, and instead of saying, and that conversation goes away from let's clean some documents to let's build an information environment that enables us to use Copilot and AI safely and effectively. So I think it is an opportunity for information leaders rather than a risk at the moment. So that's how I would take it.
Yeah, agreed. And it's so fundamentally, it's one of those things that you can utilize as an information leader is that AI, this is why we need to get our information sorted. And this is the outcomes. And these are also the risks. So why
Hmm.
are organizations blaming Copilot for poor results? Do you think it's the expectations being set too high? Or do users understand that Copilot works with the information and access already um, available to their organization?
So I mean, the reason for Copilot giving poor results, or at least seemingly poor results, I would say, is five different things that Copilot is looking at bad information, and that's because of five different things, I would say. One is duplicate information, the other is outdated information, the next is poor ownership of information, and then poor permissions, poor structure in metadata. I think everything has to contribute here for Copilot to give you bad results. Duplicate information has a different side effect, outdated information has a different side effect on what Copilot is looking at and then responding to. So what usually you need to understand is, how does Copilot actually work? How does the grounding happen? How does it connect to Microsoft Graph and connect with information in your organization, and then uses that to answer the questions. So once we understand that, I think we understand what are the different problems we have with our information estate. And once we understand that, I think we know, naturally we know what is there to be fixed. So partly users have just got, or IT have just got the license, they have activated Copilot, and they are magically expecting it to work, but it does not work that way, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. And you talked about that in our podcast this week, didn't you? That aired on Tuesday, around how you can test Copilot. But what actually does a fair test of Copilot look like now?
A fair test of Copilot, I would say, you know, um, are you Copilot readiness, right? I mean, whether when you ask that question, where if your policy, for example, but do you have an authoritative version of the policy? If five people give you five different answers, that's a warning sign. If nobody knows who owns an information set, which is the ownership issue that I was talking about, it's a warning sign. If people say don't trust anything in that SharePoint site, it's a warning sign. So employees have had access to thousands of sites, and nobody has reviewed those permissions for years. Again, a warning sign. So these are the different risks that present, and that's exactly what we need to look at.
Fantastic. So what are the exact information issues Copilot exposes? So you've talked about several other things. So there's things about seeing out of date content, duplicates. There's unclear ownership and weak structure or inconsistent naming conventions. But what problems tend to surprise you and clients that you work with most?
So for me, the biggest one is, out of the things that you mentioned, all of them are problems that need to be fixed. But for me, the two that stand out are outdated content and metadata, loss of context around information. So, Copilot is really good at reading content, summarizing content. Okay, but if you do not supply it with enough metadata, information about information, it loses the organizational context. So it can definitely, throw it a document and ask Copilot to summarize it. It will do a very good job. But then, point it to a library in SharePoint, and throw a bunch of documents, does not have any metadata. We don't know whether the file is the final version. We don't know whether the who owns that specific file, whether the file has any citations or anything of that sort. So any loss of metadata around that file for me is something where Copilot actually struggles with, because it does not have enough context. And the one that I've talked about, outdated information, I've seen organizations where content is never deleted. Now, again, I'm not saying go ahead and start deleting content that is raw, redundant, obsolete, or trivial, but at least start looking at information that you need to prioritize. Okay, and look at information that should have been deleted. Run reports across your information estate and try to figure out. So, I work with an organization, to give you a practical example. Um, an organization about 200,000 odd users. We're talking about information in petabytes, and the mandate was very simple. Okay, we're not talking about Copilot here, a completely different thing, but it is still a problem that needs to be fixed. Because when we talk about fixing permissions, we are also talking about things like applying right permissions, of course, and applying things like DLP in Purview, or be it sensitivity labels in Purview. But then, can an organization who has so many documents effectively apply sensitivity labels? Microsoft has increased the limits only last week. Yes, we heard the information from Microsoft that they've increased the limits, but still with those limits, do you need to apply sensitivity labels to documents that don't need to be in your organization, right? It's a waste of resources. um, and now, because Copilot has access to so many outdated documents, stale documents, it is not able to give you the right answer, or the right answer at that point in time. It can give you an accurate answer that was probably right in 2022, but not relevant today. So these are the problems that I usually face. And the problems, to be honest, the problems have been the same for so many years. The problems that we've been talking about, duplicate information, outdated information, ownership or metadata, these problems have existed. Copilot is just trying to expose those problems right in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think it's really interesting that you talked about your information. So on page 89 of my book, there's a really nice diagram around your information life cycle. And if you need to know any more about metadata, which is your favourite topic, Canal, there's also a sort of a description on page 94 of the book club. Now, I just want to apologise for the crackle going through this session today. Just been trying to sort out my computer. I believe it's my end, so do apologise, and I shall get that sorted for next week. So, well, Kanal, that was an amazing answer, and I want to know from everybody watching of what issues do you feel most familiar in your organisation? Please add something into the comment. I would love to know. We have an amazing amount of people that turn up and watch on the replays, but getting that engagement from you would be amazing. So just pop something into the comments. So, Kanal, what role do permissions actually play when it comes to Copilot?
Okay, permissions, yes, and we've talked about even in the podcast, when we were talking about permissions, um, we've already talked about oversharing. Now, one thing that we need to understand is Copilot does not create permissions, right? It does not magically change the permissions model that you already have. um, if a user has had access to something, that access can become relevant when AI helps them find and understand that information. So, and that's what makes AI different from traditional search. So let's say if I had access to a document a couple of years ago, let's say in 2014, I had access to a document, and I've actually forgotten about it. Okay, and it was a sensitive document. At that point, it is still a sensitive document, and no one in the organization knows I have access. Everybody trusts the system right now, the state it is in. And let's say we are not in the AI era, and if we were to search for the document, what would happen if, even if the document was relevant for search results, that possibly that document might have been buried under, the fifth page or the sixth page or the seventh page of the search results. So traditionally, you would search for a document. When you try to look for answers, you will search for a document, and even the search cannot, work like how Copilot does. Copilot, if based on your prompt, if Copilot thinks this document is the right, has the right authority, to answer that particular prompt or provide a response to that particular prompt, Copilot will surface, response from content of that document right away in front of you. Okay, so a document where, even I did not know that I had access to, is now surfacing right in front of me. A document that is overshared, people have forgotten about the permission. So, AI can help people discover information they did not even know they could access. So permissions that were previously a theoretical risk in some sense now become, visible risk. If a HR folder, for instance, had excessive permissions for years, Copilot did not create that problem, the organization did. So AI does not eliminate, your permission problem. It makes your permission problem much easier to discover. And that's why, if you see a lot of blog posts, a lot of people, consultants have been talking about the oversharing problem. And when a vendor releases a thing like Copilot, and then they release, tools to overcome things like oversharing, you understand that this problem is not just, a one-off case. It's been with everyone. So Microsoft has now released so many different reports, oversharing reports, even fixes, in the data governance access thing, where you can go and fix those problems automatically, or at least generate reports, where, oversharing has been done. So when a vendor is working towards a specific resolution of a problem, you know that that problem is quite valid across different organizations as well.
Brilliant. So, what is one, I'm all for practical, I'm all for getting something done. What is one permission check that a leader can request without becoming really technical?
Oh, of course, overshared permissions, everyone in your organization, check for that, check for anonymous sharing links. I went into one organization, I remember very well, UK based, um, and a very, very, famous organization, operates in the retail space. And the first thing, when I went into their SharePoint environment, and the SharePoint admin center, the one thing that I was totally surprised with is that their sharing level of the SharePoint and OneDrive was set to, anonymous access. That means I could have picked a file, and I did actually demonstrate that. I picked the file, I shared a link, I posted it in an email, I sent it to myself, my organization, right? And I opened the link from my organization's, browser, and I could show them that I can still access this document. So if large organizations can, keep their permissions level to that extent, which is generally not recommended, I think that's a problem, to be looked at first. So check your sharing controls, check your, access controls in terms of, who has access to everything, right? Everyone except external users is what we call in SharePoint. Yeah.
Brilliant. So let's talk about your favourite topic, metadata, and how that affects AI. So what happens when documents have vague titles, missing dates, unclear ownership, or no consistent classification? Is the metadata still important when AI can search full text? What is the minimum useful context organization should add?
Okay. So, you know, again, I wouldn't go to the extent of saying if you do not have metadata, Copilot won't work. I mean, that's too simplistic if you ask me. It's not like if you do not have any metadata, then you should not deploy Copilot. Um, as I said, AI can understand document content very well. The problem is that the content does not alone provide, that organizational context. Now, for example, there could be a file in your repository which is, full of final _v2 _ new. Like, we like naming things. And it is readable, but it has contents which make sense. But what does the name tell us? What does the name of that file tell us? Who owns it? Is that document current? Is it authoritative? Is it a draft? Does another document supersede it? Now, these are the things that you will not be able to answer without effective metadata being present on that particular document. Now, AI needs to understand not only what does this document say, but increasingly, what is this document in the context of my organization, right? AI can understand the words in your documents, and metadata will help understand the meaning and context around that document. So then, the response that you get from Copilot with metadata and without metadata, you will see that there is, huge difference between how Copilot can respond, with authority. And that's the thing. And at least you can trust the system um, more than you would have earlier. So that's the use of metadata, I would say. Of course, there are other benefits apart from Copilot that which directly affect how Copilot also works. Applying your retention based on metadata and all of that, which in the end also helps Copilot, because documents that are not supposed to be retained will never get labeled. And at some point, you can run deletion policies on those documents that you're not supposed to retain. So of course there are, metadata helps in other ways as well. When we talk about information governance, we often talk about metadata. If you remember, Jackie, we have the information architecture course from Leadership Through Data, and there is one slide that always resonates with me, which has a Venn diagram. And that Venn diagram has three things. When we talk about information, we talk about the users, talk about the content, and we talk about the context. And that's the context that metadata provides. We have the content, we have the users. Of course, users are at the center of everything, and then we have the context. And that's exactly what metadata is about. And that's why it is useful for Copilot. So yes, do provide the opportunity for users to tag information with the relevant metadata, and you will see wonders in your Copilot responses.
Brilliant. So, if you're just joining us, today's big question is Copilot the problem, or is it exposing problems we already had? Kanal's just given an amazing description around the importance of metadata, and highlighted that Leadership Through Data do a Microsoft 365 information architecture course. You can have it as a public course, and you can also digest it, which starts at the second cycle of the Empower program, which is on the 90-minute digestible content. And I really like that because it breaks it down to 90 minutes. You can learn something live, go away and do something, and then come back. So that starts the second cycle, which is from October. And I'd love to have you all on there, because we're going back to my book again, Canal. It's the blueprint of all the things that you need to know. So, Canal, what signs show that an organisation is not ready for AI? So kind of an open question too, so I'm just going to fill it with some more. So what should a chief executive, a board member, or an information leader notice? And the warning signs, should they pause a wide rollout? Or should the user trust itself and look for the readiness signs that we spoke about in the podcast? And I've just popped that link into the chat as well.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, to answer the question, what signs show an organization is not yet AI ready? I mean, for me, if Copilot gave you an answer tomorrow, how would you know whether you could trust it? If you can answer that question, if you can say that yes, we know that this information is coming from an authoritative source, we know that this information does not have any copies of it lying anywhere or redundant copies of it, and if I can clearly establish an owner for that piece of information, um, if I can answer these questions, I think at least I am AI ready. Now that you should not just take one question, take about 15 or 20 questions that are central to your organization. When I say central to your organization, central to your business processes of the organization, right? The business that you are in, be it, as I said, be it customer service or sales or anything. Be it if you're a retail chain, then there are specific. So take those 15 or 20 questions where tomorrow, if you were to, let's say, put those questions to Copilot, and if Copilot, and observe what responses Copilot give for those questions. If you're confident enough to say that yes, we are ready to put our name behind that question or that source of the document that Copilot is referring to answer that question, then I think you're AI ready. Yeah. So AI ready isn't just about whether you have an AI license. It's about whether you trust the information your AI can see. um, Again, as I said, everything revolves around the trust in the information, and that's everything that we've talked about anyways so far.
Agreed. And that's fundamentally why I created the Empower Accelerator, just to get you AI ready. So if organisations have limited time and budget, which is a question that I get told quite a lot from customers across the world, how should they prioritise information quality, permissions, metadata and ownership?
Hmm. Okay, again, a great question. It's not just you. I've been asked this question a lot of times from different customers that, okay, you told us that these problems exist. We have run reports. We have assessed our current state. We've had those workshops. We know where we stand. So how do we fix that now? Now I wouldn't tell leaders to clean up everything. If you have 10 million documents, you are not going to manually clean up 10 million documents before deploying AI, right? At that pace, AI will never get deployed. So start with risk and value. What information matters the most? Who should access it? Which information is trusted? What's obsolete? Who owns it? If you can figure out answers for these questions for your most important information, right? And instead of saying let's clean up SharePoint, if we say that let's identify the information that AI is going to make more visible and more valuable, and make sure that information is fixed first, and that information is trustworthy, I think that's the priority you should take. you know Everything has to have a phased order in which you approach. Even AI readiness can be done in phases, and you can start with information that is at risk, and information that is of value, and that is at the most risk right now. So let's say, for example, tomorrow you decide that, okay, um, we have problems with our permissions. We need to run a permissions report. Okay, and let's say you run a report, you figure out, okay, sites that are overshared. Amongst those sites, you know that, okay, this is one department, or these are the two departments that work with the most sensitive information. In fact, how I even get questions, how do I figure out which department contains the most sensitive information that they work with, right? So again, before you run that report, you need to know answer to that question, right? So only when you can answer these questions, and you can pin down two departments or three departments, and of course, Purview has all the tools that you need to answer these questions. Remember, for example, you have the content explorer that shows you exactly which sites or users hold the most sensitive information. So that's your starting point. Filter it out, figure out what are the areas that you need to look at first, fix those, and then take that phased approach, and I think it would work eventually. But do not try to fix everything in one go and then deploy Copilot, right? If a department sites are ready, deploy Copilot in that phase. Only roll it out to that specific department right now if you see that there is huge risk in deploying it to the entire organization. So take a phased approach.
Brilliant. And I love that you talk about risk and value, because that's one of the key concepts in my book as well. So I think it's a really important thing to understand the risk and the value against it. So so based on what you said, what could somebody realistically improve within 30 days, Canal?
Okay, 30 days. Again, as I said, 30 days is just
Yep.
the improvements that you can roll out. I really doubt, because unless you've done your current state assessment, which would at least take about 30 days time to try and figure out what you have in your organization, right? For this is for an organization who have never done this before, right? If you have had information architectural elements embedded in your, let's say, site provisioning process, or in your information management processes, you have those processes in place. For those organizations, I think the current state architecture or current state assessment also becomes really easy. But for organizations, who, again, I talk to a lot of organizations who tell me that after COVID, and COVID was the reason they got on to the Microsoft 365 world, they were all on premises until then. And after that, they have never looked at the environment. People have been creating sites, teams left, right, center, no provisioning process, no approval process, or anything like that in place. Um, and now information is everywhere, information is duplicated. So for those organizations, I think you need to spend your first 30 days in assessing what you have, right? In assessing what you have, because unless you do your current state assessment, you don't know what to fix, and you will be fixing the wrong things. Okay, and I think that's where people go wrong. They jump into purview, for example, start deploying DLP policies, start deploying sensitivity labels, because when you get into purview, creating a sensitivity label is just a 2 minute or a 3 minute job. You go next in the wizard, and the sensitivity label is probably out there, right? And then you create the label policy and you publish the label. Similarly, you can do the same thing with retention, you can do the same thing with DLP policies and everything that is there in purview. But is that the right way to do things? Okay, so that's exactly what you need to do. Your first 30 days, do your current state assessment, and if possible, if you've done it in 15 days, great. Spend the next 15 days in designing a blueprint for your organization. That blueprint tells you exactly what you will implement. So I wouldn't implement anything in the first 30 days. It is doing the current state assessment and developing a design document, a decision document. I would not say a design document, a decision document, where for every use case you have a decision locked. Okay. That's how I would approach things.
Amazing. So you're working on a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So I love that. And that really is part of the ethos of having those goals, short term, mid term, and long terms. So a lot of the things that I always focus on, feedback and mistakes, I call them magic mistakes in my book. What mistakes do you see repeatedly that organizations are making? Are they buying licenses before agreeing outcomes? Are they testing with poor use cases? Or are they just treating it as an IT project? Like, what are you seeing?
Hmm. Okay. So, organizations treat what I've seen so far is, um, there is this FOMO, fear of missing out. And, organizations are treating like, okay, we should buy the license right now. We should start using Copilot. Okay, because we should be AI ready. Every organization out there is talking about AI and how AI is helping them. But, that's just 5% of what you've seen so far. I bet 95% are not seeing value in the use of AI today. Okay, yes, the numbers are out there. The adoption rates have increased. If you see the latest results from Microsoft, also they are clearly indicating that Copilot adoption has increased multifold. But does Copilot adoption in terms of numbers mean usage of Copilot? And um, organizations admitting that they get value out of Copilot is a different thing. Now, why is, I mean, again, it's not a Microsoft problem, it's not a Copilot problem. Organizations are treating Copilot, as I said, as an IT project. They're buying licenses, you're deploying the technology, and you're expecting adoption. It does not happen that way. Even Copilot needs to go through a process of change management. Has the same thing. It causes the behavioral change in terms of how users will start working with information now. And you have to have strong adoption mechanisms. Now, also organizations assume that um, you know searchability is equal to readiness. Because Copilot can find a document, you give it a prompt, it was able to find that document and give a response out of it, does not mean that information should be trusted. Now, they try to do everything. They try to ignore permissions, assume that somehow users will fix it at the scale it is there right now. Again, these are all assumptions, an assumption skill. And again, the success of Copilot adoption, as I said, is being measured in numbers. How many, even for organizations, let alone Microsoft, even organizations are measuring success by how many users they get. how many people are actually using Copilot, rather than asking, are users getting trustworthy answers? So the biggest mistake, if you ask me, is treating AI readiness as a technology deployment problem instead of an information trust problem. And that's what I've been seeing across the organization so far.
Brilliant. So the biggest mistake to avoid is making sure that AI is an information management project, not an IT project. So, and we'll keep banging that drum, Kunal, as we go forward. So, how do people know which source is current and which is authoritative? So, what do ownership, life cycles, and access look like in a trusted environment? And can an organization ever reach perfect information, or is it the goal controlled and improvement?
Hmm. Okay. So, I mean, your question is effectively like, what does a trusted information actually look like?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I got so excited with all the questions. I just wanted to throw them all in at one point. So, yeah, I've sort of been giving you lots and lots of different questions. But yeah, that
No,
is my
no,
question.
no, that's okay. But if you've seen me answering questions right now, I keep coming back to the same, um, you know, topics. The point is, trusted information does not mean perfect information, and I think that's also partly the problem why Copilot in some organization never gets rolled out, because people are looking for that perfect information. Does not exist, right? We need reasonable confidence about, whether we can trust the information or not, and what is going to give us that confidence. When when you know, who owns that document, what are the permissions around that document, whether the document is the final document, whether it is authoritative, and whether that information has enough business context. Once you know answers to that question, as a human, you can, trust that information. The same thing applies for Copilot and AI, right? Trust is contextual. A document is completely valid, but it might not be authoritative for a particular question, or that specific question. In fact, as I said, the question that you should be asking is this the right information for this purpose at this point in time and for this user? Right? If you can answer that question, I mean, that's the best you can do, right? And that's the trusted information that we are talking about. So trust isn't about accuracy at all. It is, accuracy plus context plus ownership plus appropriate access. If you've got all this sorted, you can trust the information, and I think that should be enough for Copilot also to trust the information, give you a sound response back.
Yeah, and I love that. I always ask the perfect question because I don't ever think perfect is there. It's good enough, and what you're describing is good enough. And it's such an important point when it links back to my book, because it's not about pretending information will ever be perfect, organizations will be perfect, they'll have everything perfectly running. It's about creating enough ownership, context, and control for people and the AI to use it with confidence. So we're coming up to the 40 minutes on. We've still got no comments in the chat. I have put the link to the podcast that went out on Tuesday. Love to know if you're still with us and what you're enjoying. So pop your comments in the chat while I ask now a couple more questions. So one more question. So how can, from all of you've described, how can information leaders use this opportunity to get information management and influence it within organizations to get AI value, to reduce risk and make those better decisions? What conversations should they start this week with executives?
Right. I mean, the good thing is that AI, I mean, at least information leaders or information management professionals have now got a chance to talk to their leadership. That's one to begin with. Okay.
Yeah.
And as I said, they've got their 4 minutes in the boardroom. You have probably get 4 minutes with them, right? And that's the time you would get to explain the problem. So don't start saying that, okay, or let's say if you started working on AI readiness already, and when you are in the room and when you're trying to make the business case for Copilot, the obvious questions will be the same thing that we've been asking, right? Have we sorted our permissions? Have we sorted our duplicates? Have we sorted our outdated content? Do we know who owns what information there is to own? Okay. So again, in 4 minutes, you won't be able to answer those questions effectively. Do not say that there were about 400 sites with broad access, and we have fixed those. Say that show that numbers in trend, and that's what I have also talked about in the podcast. That give numbers in trend. Say that, okay, we had about these many sites, these many have been fixed, these many are remaining, and within those sites there were 10 sites that were really confidential or contain highly confidential information, and those have been fixed as well. I mean, these numbers will immediately get your board's attention, and they will know that you are ready, in the sense that you're taking steps to be AI ready. Okay. So once you're in that room, always talk about that. Always remember that the quality of the information will directly affect what your AI can do. Now, and that's the conversation you should be having in the boardroom as well, that you're working towards that quality of information. And that's about it. I think that's the opportunity that we've been waiting for. And yeah, I mean, the executives will have to listen.
Yeah, and
No
I
other
kind of
choice.
want to bring in the point that you talk about you get 4 minutes for executives. And I think, people might think, oh, 4 minutes is not a very long time, but there's actually a lot of things that you can do in 4 minutes. Very much in the front of my book. So the first chapter, engagement, is around presentations. It's around preparation, practice, and performance. And we talk about the 5 Ps. So it's about planning that execution of those 4 minutes canal, and it's around you as a person, as an information leader, to actually, if you've got those 4 minutes, make damn sure you make a good opportunity to deliver what you want to deliver within that time. If you've got 4 minutes, great. If you've got 10, you don't want 30 minutes because you can drag on. So make it clear and concise. And the one takeaway message, just have one thing that you want them to do with the outcomes of those 4 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but
No, 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 go.
you use those 4 minutes to buy your 40 minutes. Four
Yeah.
minutes are never going to be enough, right? That's the whole agenda. You use those 4 minutes to buy 40 minutes of the time of the executives. Yeah.
But if you look at TED Talks, they do things in 15 minutes, don't they? So, you don't need the 30, 40 minutes. You can utilize your time and make sure you execute it well. So I would 100%, if you've only got 4 minutes, you want to extend it, great, get it extended, but use those 4 minutes and really make sure that you're driving that back. So bringing it back to everybody watching, what has surprised you most during Copilot adoption? Please put your answers in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Kanal is joining me next week as well, so we can pick up anything from the comments of this week back to next week. Now, I am full on action and full on getting things done. So your takeaway action this week is to assess whether your organisation trusts the information Copilot can access. We've given you huge amounts of resources. Kanal talked about that 30 days. In the podcast, he's given you some really good questions about how you can really make use for it. Choose one real Copilot use case and ask, is the source current? Is it authoritative? And is access appropriate? And is there clear ownership? So there's some questions that I would leave you with today. If today's discussion has made you question how ready is your organisation, please complete the scorecard, the Leadership Through Data Empower scorecard. It's an AI readiness scorecard. It will work you through a wide range of questions, and it will give you a RAG rated outcome against the chapters in my book. So everything leads back to my book, and it will help you identify where you can focus your energy on and within those 30 days, so you can start thinking clearer for points for actions. Kanal, you've been sensational. I love doing things with you, but in one sentence, so there's no rapid fire questions for you, as in the podcast, but one question: why is readiness worth assessing before organisations scale Copilot?
I don't want any
Oh,
more
I've
questions.
lost your sound there, Kanal. Go again.
I'm sorry. Uh,
You're a bit pixelated, so I've lost the sound again. Are you there? Are you there? It's the issue with live recording. So just while Canal gets himself in, my takeaway is that a bad co-pilot answer may be useful, but it can show us where information is outdated, overexposed, poorly described, or not clearly owned. So please make sure you look at your information architecture and all the wonderful things that we've been talking about today: life cycles, redundant, obsolete, trivial, metadata, and sharing. Canal, are you back with me if you just want to answer that question? No, I've got no sound, my lovely. That's okay. Just pop it in the comments. We're good. Thank you to everybody who watched and contributed. And if you're watching on replay, it really means a lot that you've spent the time with us. Join us next week. So me and Canal, we're going to be talking about purview without panic and what leaders actually need to know. Continue to follow the podcast because there will be additional snippets from the podcast to the LinkedIn Lives. We've now joined them up, so I'm really excited to have Canal do this work with us and have those conversations over the next coming weeks. Complete the scorecard, and that will give you a really one-use check to see where you are. And keep information management blooming good. So see you next time. Be bold, be brave, and be beautiful. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.